All right, I want to welcome everyone back to the panel room. This week we've got a panel about young adult writing. So let's just go around with our authors and have each of them introduce themselves. Let's start with AJ.
Hey, I'm AJ Hartley. I write lots of things in lots of different genres and different age groups, middle grade, adult, and obviously talking about young adult. So I'll focus on that. I did a series, actually, I did a series called Steeplejack, you see that? For Tor, came out a few years ago. It's a 3-book series. And I recently published, and then I did a couple of ghost stories called Cold Bath Street and Rittenstone Lane, which was set in the UK. And just now, I've just published a new YA called Impervious, which is sort of Buffy the Vampire Slayer-esque. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, Lucienne.
Hi, I'm Lucienne Diver. I write the Vamp Young Adult series, which is also kind of Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Clueless. More recently, I've been writing young adult suspense. My most recent is Disappeared, which is just out. Before that was The Countdown Club, and I've also got Fault Lines in the young adult suspense area. And then in the adult urban fantasy area, I write the Latter-day Olympian series. And that's me.
All right. And so going back to starting with you, Lucienne, what makes a book young adult for you?
For me, it's not just about the age of the protagonist. It's really about what the focus is. It's about them figuring themselves out, and it's about it being subversive about the people in power and everything else, to figuring out that, well, I think as a parent, I'm very, very well aware that we know nothing, or at least as far as, teenagers are aware, we know nothing. And they really have to be the ones that solve the problems and find the answers. And realize that they have to go about their own ways of doing things and setting their boundaries and figuring out who they are, but also not bowing to conventional wisdom and not accepting the answers that they're given or accepting the place that they're relegated to. And I think that's very much part of young adult, is it being subversive and it being busting out of the places that you're put. And I think that that's true of other kinds of fiction too. I think science fiction and fantasy and things like that are very much about taking on the establishment as well. But I think from young adult, it comes from a place where you're not given that kind of power, and you're not expected to have it, and you very much have to grasp it. And so I think for me, it's very empowering. And I think it's one of the reasons that I really like writing that genre. I like people discovering their power and discovering things about themselves. And mysteries are also discovering things about what's going on and what's happened and uncovering layers. And I like peeling back layers and mysteries, whether it's about a person or a situation.
Okay, great. AJ?
Yeah, what she said. I think Lucienne puts her finger on it pretty well there. I'm trying to think what I can add to that. The two things really strike me about YA. One of them is about that sense of the enormity of everything, and it's partly because of what you were just saying, that sense that your parents are not always going to be there to bail you out, that the grown-ups, the adults, don't define your existence. But along with that comes the sense that you're just sort of feeling your way through the adult world, and you start to experience things that you've never experienced before, right? So every friendship feels like the most intense thing ever. Every betrayal feels like the biggest thing ever. And the stakes are automatically really high, and higher, I think, for YA than for adult. You know, for adult, because we go through as adults, we go through the world and experience lots of things. There's a kind of little ranking system that we have in our heads all the time to how important something is to us. And I think when you're a teenager, you're still figuring that out. And so everything feels incredibly important. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say, and really, again, it's just an extension of what Lucienne has already said, is that, and I feel this with my teenage son, because of the way that you're evolving away from what you were given, what you were born into, the world as you saw it, the ideas that you've inherited from your family and your parents. Part of the key about YA is that it's that moment where you start to say, who do I want to be? That simple. What do I want to stand for? You know, where does the buck stop? Which is the hill I'm prepared to die on? You know, all of those kind of cliched things that I think are really important. And I think one of the reasons that, you know, we think back to those moments. I'm a big music fan, and you know what it's like to hear the music that you listen to as a 17-year-old or whatever, 16, 17, you know, and there's an urgency to it and a power to it. And I think it's that it's taking you back to those moments where you were saying, who am I? What speaks for me? What do I want to stand for? So yeah, I think it's those things.
And that word you used, enormity, I think sums it all up so well. Young adult fiction and just the experience of being a young adult, there's so many firsts. We don't have the context of this too shall pass, or we'll get over this. Everything is so enormous because it's the first time we're encountering like first love, first heartbreak, first, you know, and it feels enormous because we haven't been through it before. We don't have the experience to feel that we will get over it, that it's not the end of the world, and it does always it does all feel enormous, and then of course as writers we're putting our characters in situations that are enormous, that are larger than life, and we're just really emphasizing that and the tension, and exposing all the fractures, and it just it makes all of it that much more powerful at a particularly powerful and vulnerable and emotional and hormonal and all of that time in the life, and it's just all very, very close to the surface, and you know, again, that word enormity, but also just powerful and emotional, and I just think it is just one of the most accessible and terrifying, I think, times in a life, which is why it's so easy for us as adults to harken back to, because in some ways we've never really gotten that far away from it. And in some ways, I mean, you know, I've been married for 23 years, but if I were to have to go back into the dating pool, I would be that teenager again. I would be neurotic and vulnerable and terrified and awkward and all of those things all over again. And it's just a step away. And so I can easily imagine myself back in that situation, hoping I never have to be.
Okay, that kind of leads into a question I got off of Facebook from Samantha Dunaway Bryant. She says, for writers that write both YA and the books intended for adult audiences, can you kind of share some of the differences in your mindset when you're writing it? Is it, you know, are YA typically simpler in the sense of maybe fewer plot lines, or is there a distinct difference other than their age?
Not for me. You know, I think anything that you can do in adult, you can do in YA. that may affect who publishes you and what your readership is. There are certain things that you can do in a YA novel that Scholastic are not going to want to to carry. But no, I don't think so. And I think there's a danger there, actually, as there is with most writing for kids of any age. I think the danger of simplifying or in some form dumbing down, that serious literature is for adults, and for kids somehow less and has to be kept simpler. I don't think so. I think you write the book that you want to write, and it should be as complex as it needs to be.
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Then my next question comes from Jessica Nettles. When you began writing, and I'm talking about, in this case, your first YA book, did you think it was YA, or did your publisher, someone else, say, oh no, this is YA, and shifted into that point for you?
You want to start, AJ?
Okay. Again, for me, maybe because I write it in different age groups and different genres, for me, the age group is really clear right at the beginning of the project, because there are certain kinds of stories that I'm going to want to tell for certain kind of readership. And, I guess you could say, oh, I'm not sure if this is a rich middle grade or a YA. And so I don't know if my character is going to be 11 or 15, say. But most of the time, if I have some idea about what the story is going to be about, that's going to be pretty clear to me. This is going to be a story for kids, or it's going to be a YA story. So I've never really been in the situation where somebody else was pushing me to age it up or down, because the way that, there's going to be tons about the story that I don't know in advance. But usually whatever I think the hook of the story is, whatever I think the meat of the story is going to be fairly self-evidently middle grade or YA or adult.
And my first young adult book was Vamped. And it starts with Gina's rules for surviving your senior prom, which she did not. And so it was very clearly young adult. There was no question in my mind. It was about this, 17-year-old girl with the big hair and the big reputation, who always had to have the perfect nails and the perfect hair and the perfect makeup, who did not survive her senior prom, was buried and rose from the dead 3 days later in literally the thing that she would not be caught dead in, had to claw her own way out of the grave, totally ruining her hair and makeup. Found out she had 0 tanning options left. I mean, there was just no question that it was young adult. And then there's a rival vampiress and wackiness ensues and that kind of thing. And there was just no question. Yeah, there's just no question for me when I'm writing young adult that I'm writing young adult, and when I'm writing adult fiction that I'm writing adult fiction. However, my adult urban fantasy series is also very snarky, and also it was something that naturally my readers of Vamped could age into. So it had a very youthful voice as well. It had a very snarky voice as well. So I tend to write very snarky. I tend to have a very similar tone in my contemporary fantasy. But once I went to the suspense, what was different for me is tonal difference from when I'm writing the more lighthearted, more urban fantasy, whether it's for adults or young adults, to when I had to shift to suspense. So to me, there was a tonal difference, but it's easy to tell the audience. What was hard for me was shifting tones rather than audience.
Okay, thank you. And with most panels that you get used to at cons, we do have someone that
the late person
just able to slip in.
That hotel was so crowded. Everyone was cosplaying. It was just like a mess to try to get through. I was at this other thing. You come. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mari Mancusi. I live in Austin, Texas, and I am the author of all sorts of books for adults, teens, and middle grade. So for that younger group, that's actually my new book that's coming out actually in 1 week from today, is Dragon Ops. And that is a middle grade kind of lit RPG type story about 3 kids who get trapped in the world's very first augmented reality theme park, and an AI dragon has gone rogue, and he is forcing them to play through the game, or they will real life die. So basically,
Jumanji with dragons.
yes, exactly, Jumanji with dragons.
All right. So with young adult fiction, what brings you back after you wrote your first young adult book? What brings you back to continue to write young adult? And I'll start with you, Mary.
Sure. I mean, I think it's the audience. I just love the reactions. When I got started, I started an adult, and people read the book and they're like, oh, this is a great book. And they put it down, they go to the next book. And with kids, I found they just wanted to live in the world that I created. They were so invested in it. They would role play my characters, or draw fan fiction, or I draw, fan pictures, write fan fiction, all that kind of stuff. And it was so energizing to see how much they enjoyed becoming a part of the world. Now, I think part of that is also that it's a paranormal world. So, that I was writing in at the time. And, that certainly engages, people to want to do that sort of thing. But I just fell in love with the kids. I like going and doing school visits and meeting them and seeing all their enthusiasm. It just kind of keeps me going. So I think that's one of the reasons. Plus, I think I'm probably a 14-year-old girl at heart. And it just feels very natural to write about things like video games and dragons and all that stuff maybe we were supposed to grow out of, but I never did, and lots of us never did in the fandom world. And I think this is a great opportunity to explore that.
Great. Lucienne?
I agree. I love the fans, but I also agree that I think I'm a kid at heart, and I never really grew out of it. During this whole pandemic, my husband is sharing an office with me, and I've declared that Thursdays are kilted up Thursdays, so he's going to wear a kilt. Just because it makes it fun. And so he's declared that I have to wear a headdress of some sort. So on Thursday, I wore my Antiope headdress from Wonder Woman. And this Thursday, I'll probably wear my Wonder Woman headpiece. And, so I agree. I'm with you, Mary. I can't give a better answer. Show my answer. Your paper next time. So.
About you, AJ? Anything to add?
I guess, as I was saying, I'm kind of drawn to the idea of the story, and I don't know what the next thing I'm going to write is. I don't know if it's going to be an adult book or a YA book or whatever. But as soon as I have the idea for a story, I know which it's going to be, And, I got into writing, I wrote middle grade before I wrote YA. And I did that because my son was 8. And I had been writing murder mysteries and going on ride-alongs with the local police department, which, starts to get really bleak and depressing after a while. And I came home one night and said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to write a book for my son. So I did. And then as he got older, I think I sort of aged up a little with him, and as everybody's saying, it's true that those of us who are driven by imagination and the impulse to create often have a lot of that sort of child still about us, or the teen. And so, as a parent, I have kind of re-accessed all that, and I can pretend as a writer that it's just sort of respectable. And so, yeah, and it's funny that the after I did the Steeplejack series, the ghost stories that I wrote, which are set in the UK, they are very specifically also set in the late 70s, because I'd written books in which the protagonist was nothing like me at all, and I felt like I wanted to write a book, a YA book from my own perspective, and that meant going back to when I was a young adult and writing about, And so, yeah, the ghost story grew very specifically out of my own memories of what it was like to be in Northwest industrial England in like 1978. You know? So
And
I guess what I'm saying is the project dictates, you know, the readership or the age group.
great. Then also on Facebook, Lucy Blue asked, well, it was kind of a statement with a question. Young adult is kind of infamous at the moment for its contentious and very vocal adult fan base. Is that something you consider as part of your writing process, or you just focus specifically on your younger audience that it's designed for?
I mean, for me, I write books for teens, and if I'm writing a book for a teen anyway, that is who I focus on, the core readership. That is who I'm addressing, and I'm totally fine with adults reading it. I absolutely, I read a lot of YA myself, and I very much enjoy it, but I'm not writing stories for them. And one of the reviews sometimes I'll get on some of my stuff is like, oh, this would be good if you were like 15, you know, like, and like, yeah, that's funny. Go figure. So, you know, you have to, with any criticism or any critique or any audio, you have to kind of shut out that noise when you're writing, when you're in there, and you have to be with the story and the characters and tell it as true as you can tell it as an author, and not worry about that kind of stuff, and just, you know, be true to your audience.
Yeah, I agree. I write for kids, and I think your responsibility when you're writing for teenagers is what they're going to take away from it and the message that they're going to take away from it. For instance, now that I'm writing suspense, my suspense will have issues in it. One of my books has a character who cuts, and I don't mean class, and I have to be very careful about the way that I deal with that. In one of my books, there was a character who committed suicide, and her best friend is dealing with the fallout from that, and so are other characters. And I wanted to be very, very, very careful about the way that I dealt with that and how they dealt with it. And you have to be very, very thoughtful about the way that you do deal with it, and any possible takeaway and any possible statement and the way it might be taken in and out of context, and everything else. And you have a real responsibility for that. And so those are the readers that you're thinking about while you're writing it. And that's where your responsibility is. I'm always tickled when I do hear from adult readers, particularly on the Vamp series, which was very much fun and very much for the younger mentality. I got a letter from a 60-year-old man saying, I know this was for my grandkids, but I had to see what they were reading, and I just wanted to tell you that I enjoyed it too. And I was so tickled because he was so far from my audience. But that's not who I'm thinking about when I'm writing it. That's just a bonus if somebody else can enjoy it. But I think if you're thinking about them, then you're not thinking about your core audience and your responsibility to them. And I know that there are young adult books out there, and I won't name any names, where I feel like sometimes the wrong message came across, and there might have been signals that abusive relationships were okay, or that or this or that. And I want to make sure I never send that message. And I think that we have a responsibility when writing for teens that we're never sending the message that those signals are good signals. And rather than warning signs and things like that. So that's 2 cents.
I hate to give it to you again, AJ, after both of those great answers. Do you have anything to add on that one?
I mean, not really. I think, you know, I think that the concern about how your work is going to be read and how people will respond to it is always a legitimate concern that you should always be thinking about. Because we're not diarists. We're not just keeping a journal that stays under the bed, right? The whole point is that we're writing for other people. We're trying to share stories with an audience. So you have to think about how people will respond. But I think there's a point at which you also have to say, and this comes back to what I was saying before about making the decisions about who you're going to be and what hill you're prepared to die on. You know, that there's a point at which you have to say, some of this is going to upset people. And that's okay, because I think that they should be upset, or I'm prepared to take a particular stand. You can't please everybody. I think the key is to make sure that you're doing it deliberately, that you're aware of what you're doing. And if that means getting a lot of readers who are maybe more sensitive to some of the issues than you are, I think then that's what you should do. But, you know, you don't shoot for universal popularity. That makes you timid. And timidity is is timidity a word? Did I just make that up? Timidity is another word for cowardice, right? It's the enemy of good art.
I'm not saying that you don't tackle issues, but I'm saying that you are careful not to trigger people if you can avoid it, and that you do not make bad things seem good, is basically what I'm saying. I'm not saying you don't tackle issues, because I think you do. I think that as writers, we try to contribute to a conversation and that we are taking a stance. I'm just saying that we try to be careful of the message that we're sending, because you are going to send a message and you are going to obviously think about that message. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. No, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm just trying to figure out where we as writers put the deciding factor of when you're doing enough or too much, right? And I think that, as I say, I think you're embracing an issue and thinking it through and saying, and maybe inviting other opinions, and then you make your stand, right? Rather than say, I don't want to offend anybody, I don't want to hurt any feelings, because then you say nothing.
Right,
You know?
right, absolutely.
The book that just came out is the one that I wrote after the school shooting. And I had editors when the book was submitted saying, people might find this troubling. Well, no, you're supposed to find it troubling. That's why I wrote it. And if you don't think people can handle it, then that's a problem. I'm not going to go off about this, but he says it's too late.
All right. Now, kind of sticking with that point, Vicky Perry asked, what are the genre requirements with regards to swearing, sex, drinking, drug usage? Because all of these things are definitely a real part of young adult life. As you guys were saying earlier, this is their first time of doing stuff, first time falling in love, first time this, that, everything. How do you stick with subjects that are considered either good or bad, and keep the realism and not make your character too unrealistic? Start with you, AJ.
Well, I think in some ways it's what Lucienne has just said, and what we said earlier about, figuring out what YA is and what you can and cannot do. I think you can do anything, but as Lucienne says, you have to represent things in a responsible way, and you don't want to glorify things that you don't think should be glorified, because people are going to be, whether it's publishers, agents, or whatever, are going to call you on that, and they're going to say, this looks like you're celebrating something that you probably shouldn't be celebrating. And so, I think that kind of judgment call is something that you make all the time. It doesn't mean that anything is off limits. I don't think anything is off limits, but you have to handle it responsibly in a way that, again, in the end, you're prepared to stand up for and say, yes, I understand that this is a difficult subject for some people. This is what I think about it. And I think, you should get where my position is. I think, at least for me, other authors maybe want to represent lots of different positions so that it jumpstarts some kind of conversation and people can find lots of different perspectives. I'm unlikely to do that. The Steeplejack books that I mentioned before, a lot of that is about racial prejudice and so on. I'm not looking for an ambiguous position on that.
Yeah, you can have all of those things in there. Just be aware that the farther you go, the more you might meet resistance. As AJ was saying earlier, if you've got a lot of cursing and drinking and swearing, and Scholastic probably isn't going to pick it up, or at least not in that current form. You want to make things realistic without making them over the top. And so, that is a balance, but I think, you know, I don't find it that difficult. I think it's really up to each individual author to figure out what you're comfortable with and what it represents for your characters. And that's going to be different for every character. So if you've got, a character with, a much rougher life, they're going to have one set of experiences than, another character. And they're not going to talk or think or behave the same way as another character, and they shouldn't, or it won't be authentic. So you've really got to be true to your character and the story you're telling. But that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to drop the F-bomb in every line, because for one thing, nobody wants to hear that. It's redundant and it's bad writing. So go with the needs of your story, but also go with the needs of good storytelling and good writing. And be creative with the way that you express things, and you can do better than that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we always get these kind of questions on panels, and I think a lot of new authors, new writers assume that you can't do these kinds of things, that you can't put in a lot of sex and violence and drugs and swearing. Every time I try to say, well, you can't do maybe this, I see an author do it. Like Sarah J. Maas just, puts in play-by-play sex scenes in her YAs and gets away with it, and it's fine. And so it's all out there. You can swear, you can do all those things in a YA, and there's probably the editor will not stop you. There's not like a lot of censorship out there saying, oh no, you can't do this. There's things that are more common and more widely used, but I don't think that I wouldn't say like, oh, you have to be so restricted. Now in middle grade, that's a totally different story. Middle grade is very much about the library market and the school market. And so they are much more strict about what you can include. Now middle grade, a lot of people assume is like middle school, but that's more like, it's more like the 8 to 12-year-old range. So they are very, very strict about like not having romance. Like they don't want a lot of romance in a middle grade book. They don't want any swearing in a middle grade book. Violence is okay because we're America. So, you can get pretty violent in your middle grades, but yeah, so that's a little more restrictive. So if you're looking for like can and cannots, middle grade, definitely there's a lot. YA, it's sort of like, it depends on your editor, it depends on the publishing house. And like Lucienne said, it will limit you sometimes if you have a lot of like that kind of content, because Scholastic may not pick up your book, for example, like she said. I had a book and they actually wouldn't pick it up because in a scene, and this was a YA book, in the scene, the girl took off the guy's shirt in bed and ran her fingers up his chest. And that was it. That was it. And they wouldn't take it because that was too racy for them. It's not like it was her shirt, it was his. But so you just have to make that decision and figure out what you want your book to be and who you want it to be for. And not to make my answer super long, but I just want to say, I think there's room for both styles. I think there is room for that younger YA, those kids that are now 11, 12, 13 and starting to go out of the kids section of the bookstore. There should be books for them as well. And I feel like right now, because we have such an adult audience for YA, a lot of the publishers are kind of being like, oh yeah, whatever, that younger YA, we don't want to buy that. And Lucienne could probably talk more about that being an agent. But I do feel like there's a need out there. This is a big gap in the market for that younger YA where you don't have that kind of content. And it is a little more innocent for these kids who are just coming into their teen years.
I think we have some of that too. I just think the young adult market in general is tougher right now. It's narrowed down. It kind of had a boom and now it's tightened up quite significantly. But the market does that. It ebbs and flows, and I'm sure we'll have another boom coming at some point. Please.
Evidently with Stephanie Meyer Vampires.
Yeah. So it's kind of at its narrow point in the river right now. But what is selling is diverse voices and contemporary and realistic fiction. But we do still have the sweet, the sweeter, or that, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, the Jenny Han, that kind of thing. We do still have some of the you know, the sweeter and the newer, and the not a lot of, you know, sex or violence, or, you know, so, you know, it does really run the gamut still. And yeah. But as to, you know, and we can go a little farther. I think even Scholastic has loosened up their, you know, requirements a little bit, but it's still, you know, it's still a spectrum. And I still think the farther you go with the language and everything else, you know, there will be some drop off on the markets that you can go to. So.
Okay, thank you. Now to shift gears just a little bit away from the writing portion of it and move more toward the social media, is there a specific social media platform that you found you get the best response from with your YA audiences compared to your adult audiences? Start with Mary.
I think that Instagram is a really great place for the younger audience, but I have a new YA coming out in the fall, but I have been doing middle grade for a few years now, and so with middle grade, you're more advertising to or promoting to librarians and parents and teachers, because you're not really going online to find a 12-year-old to, you know, that's a little creepy. So you do have that like a little bit of a harder issue to like sell on social media when you're going that younger group, whereas the older kids, and so maybe someone who's done YA more recently can talk more about what's, you know.
Oh Lord, I'm terrible about promoting my own books. I can promote my author's books all day long, but I'm so terrible about promoting my own books. AJ?
I'm the worst in the world. If you get yourself a Webster's dictionary and look up crap at social media, there's a little picture of me. And, you know, I don't know what to tell you. I wish I cared more. Maybe that's the problem.
Well, I don't think that when you've been in the business for a while, you realize that social media doesn't move the dial very much anyway. You may sell a few extra copies, but unless you are someone who has this already existing fandom that grew probably organically because you have fandom enabled book, you're not going to go out there and get this huge audience just from social media. They have to find your book and love it. And then when you have a core group of readers, then you can grow them, you know, with social media, with, you know, groups and all that kind of stuff. But I do think a lot of people put too much weight on social media when really it's that idea of your book is in the front of Barnes and Noble, you know, on a display, and someone walks by and is like, oh, what's this? This looks interesting. If your book gets into Target, you're going to sell thousands more copies than if your book doesn't get into Target. And fortunately, you know, you feel like you have a little control by using social media, but I don't know if it makes that much of a difference in the end.
I agree. I've met authors who had huge followings on social media, and when they, you know, really give you the skinny, usually after a few drinks, when they finally sort of, frequently it turns out that there isn't, as you say, there isn't a direct correlation between their social media presence and their book sales. But following people doesn't necessarily mean that they're buying your books.
Okay, great. Now I like an. Oh,
okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. You said great, and I said it's really not at all.
Fair point. What I like to do at the end of each of these panels is try to get some information advice for a young adult author, a new author out there. So if each of you can give me the best writing advice you think you've ever gotten, and how it might apply for a new writer out there. Whoever wants to start.
I have two pieces of advice. And one is to just persevere and just keep trying. Your journey ends when you give up. That's when it ends. Until then, now I started writing. I wrote my first book when I was 11, and it took me many years to get good and many years to publish. And if I had stopped at any point, I wouldn't be here. And really, you know, yes, it takes talent, but it really takes the willingness to listen and learn and to apply what you learn and to go back and revise and revise and revise. None of us are amazing the first time out, and we'll never get amazing if we don't acknowledge that we have flaws and work to fix them and listen to advice and to work on our skills. So just keep trying and keep submitting and keep working at it, and just keep listening to panels like this and going to workshops when you can go to workshops, or just do them online until then. But really just keep persevering and don't give up the fight until you've gotten where you want to go, is my biggest piece of advice from me. But the biggest thing I learned from others is deep POV. Deep point of view is something that I really had to learn. I did not come from a family that got in touch with our feelings, and certainly not write about them. And it was something that was something I had to do a deep dive on and learn and learn and learn. So I wish I had the links just to give you, but if you Google deep POV and follow some of the writing advice out there, you can't really do surface point of view, right? You've got to really do a deep dive and really connect intimately with your characters so that your readers will connect intimately with your characters and put us in their heads. Don't take us for the ride with them, put us in here and let us see through their eyes. And that's how you're going to connect the readers to your tale. There you go.
I mean, that's all amazing advice, and I would echo all of that. To add, I guess I would say, and to add to the characterization thing, I think that's the most important thing, because when you read a book, and I'm sure you've all had this experience, you read a book 20 years ago, and what you remember about that book is the characters. You might not remember the plot, you might not remember how it turned out in the end, but you remember those characters that felt alive to you. So really, if you're going to concentrate on something like that with the writing, concentrate on those characters and make sure each one of them has a purpose for being in the story. Don't let the story drag them along. Like, give them action. That was something that I always had to do when I was a younger writer, is I just had these characters. I had this great plot, and I was just moving my characters through the plot because I was so excited about the plot. And they didn't really have any, they could have been anyone thrown into that story. So ask yourself when you're starting your story, who is my character? What do they want? And what's stopping them from getting it? And those are just basic questions, but they will open up so much more of your story. When I do school visits, I talk about like Luke Skywalker, you know, like at the beginning of Star Wars, like, who is he? He's a farmer on Tatooine. And what does he want? He wants to be a pilot. He wants to go have adventures in outer space. And what's stopping him? Well, he's stuck on this planet. You know, his uncle and aunt aren't letting, want him to stay on the farm. And so, you develop this character just with those three things. You have someone, okay, now I understand how he fits into the story, so he's ready when Obi-Wan shows up and all of that. So just concentrate on your characters, make them alive, make them interesting, give them a quirk. Laurel K. Hamilton had the Anita Blake series, and I think one of the things that was so awesome about Anita Blake, who was this kick-ass zombie raising from the dead vampire hanging out, like all the things that she did, wearing black leather, but at night she would sleep with a stuffed penguin. And like that teeny little detail brought her alive for me in a way that you could tell me 500 things about her and it wouldn't matter. But that one detail that she sleeps with a stuffed penguin made her into someone interesting. So make your characters have purpose and make them interesting. And on the writing point of view, like more of like, the business of writing, I would say have writer friends, even if they're online friends or if they're a writers group in your town or whatever. Have people who are looking to do the same thing as you, bond with them over your common goals, because a lot of people don't understand writers. Your own family probably doesn't understand you, and so you need people with the same kind of motivation and goals and worlds in their heads that you do, and you will feel so much better and you won't feel so alone.
Right, AJ?
Pay attention to words. Read critically. When you're reading a book that you like or that you hate, be alert to what it is that's keeping you turning the pages or making you want to put it down. And if you can flag the text somehow, actually mark it. I think it's really good to be alert to the way that that writers use language to get a certain kind of effect whether it's making you see something or making you feel something, or the way that sentences get shorter during an action scene or something. Just be alert to what the book does on a sentence level. And I would also encourage people to read and write poetry. I know that sounds ridiculous, but what makes poetry work is the density of expression, you know, and it forces you to be really careful with the way you choose words. And whether you're writing it or reading a verse produced by other people, to see the care with which words are chosen. Because if you want to be a movie maker, be a movie maker. But we're writing books, and books in the end are about words. And so I think we should all be trying to be better at that. If only because, sorry, let me just add, if only because it's so hard to come up with the kind of premise that immediately sells a book, you know, or makes people immediately excited. Most of the time when I'm reading a novel, I need to be interested in the characters and I need to be interested in the story. I will need to know what's going to happen. But those two things alone will not get it done for me. If I'm not enjoying the experience of reading paragraph by paragraph, I will put the book away. I'm not finished.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. Let's go through and tell everyone where they can find you and your latest or soon-to-be latest book. Start with you, AJ.
You can find me at www.ajhartley.net, and you can find me on social media, I guess. And my latest book is called Impervious, and you can find that places. I'm so good at the self-promotion.
All right, Lucienne.
You can find me at luciennediver.com. On Twitter, I'm Lucienne Diver. On Facebook, I'm Lucienne Diver. Oddly enough, I'm Lucienne Diver everywhere. And my book is out now. Dispirit is out now, and you can find that everywhere as well. I hope you should be able to. Thank you.
I am at Mari Mancusi. That's Mary with an I, MariMancusi, just like that. My book comes out, Dragon Ops comes out on Tuesday, so it's kind of an interesting book release, you know, because there's no bookstores open, but what are you gonna do? So that's very exciting. I also have a book that I haven't talked about much yet because it hasn't been officially announced, but I think it's okay to mention. In the fall, I'm doing a Frozen 2 tie-in. It's called Dangerous Secrets, and it's basically the story of Elsa and Anna's parents when they were teenagers and all they went through. So it's a real tearjerker, and I'm really excited about it. So it should be officially like announced with a cover and all that really soon.
Okay, that's great. So that book coming out Tuesday, the 12th?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, just because this may be a couple weeks before this comes out, so
oh, okay.
It'll probably be out by that point. All right. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for coming in, and I want to thank the viewers for watching the panel room. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.